People in and around the Capital Regional District enjoy the environment as much as the many tourists who travel here. There's no denying it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. We have plenty of clean air, we're surrounded by water, we have wild places close by to explore. What's not to love? As with any growing city, more people means more housing, roads, traffic, congestion, and sometimes conflict. Will that conflict escalate as our population increases? How can we encourage business, economic development, and resource management in ways that take the impact on the environment into account? How can we decide all this while respecting and accommodating the rights of First Nations people? At the ELC, we've been floating around the idea of a Biosphere Reserve. What is a Biosphere Reserve?
A lot of people think of biosphere as the dome where people live and they generate their own oxygen, their own food for a period of time. The biosphere is that part of the environment where life occurs. So it occurs from a few meters underground, although they're now finding bacteria really deep, like hundreds of meters underground, and up into the air. So anything where life occurs is the biosphere. That's the biosphere of Earth.
A UN Biosphere Reserve is something that got started in the 70s when the UN sort of started their Man in the Biosphere program. So this is sort of like a program meant to achieve worldwide sustainability goals.
Basically, it's international recognition by UNESCO, United Nations Education, Cultural and Scientific Organization, that this is a community that's trying to do the right thing in an environmental sense, trying to practice sustainable management, trying to involve local people, indigenous people, and document it in a way so that the experiences are learnt or can be learnt by other people.
The beauty of a Biosphere Reserve is that it's a very flexible designation. So it really just brings together all the stakeholders within a community, and it allows them a forum to sort of reconcile all of their sort of ideas that might not always be sort of like ideas that might be at cross purposes.
Biosphere Reserve has three components. It's got a core area, which are your legislative protected areas, and this can be by either the provincial or federal governments, or even regional district or local communities. So they can be any park that's recognized. The buffer zone is the area that in the Biosphere Reserve that helps mediate the effects of human impacts on the core areas. And then you have a transition zone, which is the urban areas, the farmland, the agricultural land, which are impacted to varying degrees outside that.
There's basically three goals that Biosphere Reserves fulfill. The first is conservation, so protecting genetic resources, species, ecosystems, and landscapes that require protection. The second is development, and that is fostering sustainable economic and human development compatible with conservation goals.
The Biosphere Reserve concept is really, to a large extent, built around the fact that you want to sustain human culture as well as sustain the environment. It's trying to achieve this balance.
The third function is a logistical function, and that just sort of acts as like a logistical framework for setting up all of these initiatives under the Biosphere umbrella.
Mount Arrowsmith, the one that you're in right now, on the east side of Vancouver Island, has the smallest amount of actual protected area of all the Biosphere Reserves in Canada. It's about 1%. And that's because of the ENN land grant, which was done in the late 1800s, which basically meant that the whole southeast corner of Vancouver Island became private land. The other Biosphere Reserve in British Columbia is Clayoquot Biosphere Reserve, and that's on the west coast, and it's built around Pacific Rim National Park, although there are some other protected areas, provincial protected areas within it as well.
So there are three basic ways that Biosphere Reserves are organized. The first is to have an existing organization or group take on the governing of the Biosphere Reserve. And that central group is then responsible for administering all stakeholder communications and all of the framework and the administration of the Biosphere Reserve. A second way is to set up a steering committee comprised of representatives from all of the different stakeholder groups. So this is actually a more integrative way of organizing the Biosphere because each stakeholder group is actually involved in the central organization and administration.
A good management committee for Biosphere Reserve has people representing business, health, environment. And again, some people think of Biosphere Reserves as strictly another environmental organization. That's not what they are. They're much broader than that.
A third way to set up the governance of a Biosphere Reserve is to set up a nonprofit organization with charitable status.
Mount Arrowsmith is unique in Canada in that it goes from minus 300 meters to 1,867 meters high, which is the top of Mount Arrowsmith. So it's got alpine to the bottom of the ocean. Projects have been focused around identifying the species that occur within the Biosphere Reserve, mapping invasive species and distributions in our protected areas, increasing community awareness of some stream enhancement initiatives, that sort of thing. We've set up a Smithsonian biodiversity monitoring plot, and there's a number of these set up, well, many of them set up around the world, and it's a hectare where you map and identify the different species of trees that are occurring in that hectare, and then you document over time, every 5 years, the survival of these trees, how much they're growing. So as climate change occurs, we're documenting how different tree species are reacting at different elevations, for example.
I think that a Biosphere Reserve is a fantastic idea for the CRD, just because of its inherent flexibility as a concept. The CRD is home to a number of different stakeholder groups, and we've been seeing in the news and just in the media about how there are so many conflicts going on between these different groups right now. An example of that could be the TFL land scenario, also the mega yacht marina issue. And a Biosphere Reserve would be a great forum and a great framework to bring these disparate groups together.
In some respects, all of Vancouver Island could become a Biosphere Reserve. It doesn't have to just be a relatively small area, but I think it's easier to sustain larger species or highly mobile species like fish and wolves and bears and stuff if you have a larger geographical area. It's not at all unreasonable to have a Biosphere Reserve that would go from Sydney to Port Renfrew.
The real way forward in terms of sustainability is to engage those kind of stakeholders and provide them with a way to speak with conservation groups and achieve conservation goals while not halting development.
Biosphere reserves are, I guess, in the long run, are really focused towards community health. And to achieve community health, you've got to have a clean, safe environment, healthy environment, but you've also got to have a healthy community, human community. Humans are part of the natural ecosystem, so the fact that we have an impact on the environment is not a negative thing, although the scale of the impact, if it's not balanced, can be a problem.
We may already consider ourselves an eco-aware place, but there are limits to our resources. And once we lay tracks on the land through housing and development, roads, it's hard to take that back. So these decisions need to be made carefully, and they should be made with everyone at the table. Maybe a Biosphere Reserve is one way to achieve that goal. UN Biosphere Reserve designations are intended to promote and demonstrate a balanced relationship between humans and the biosphere through research, communication, and education. The CRD could be an eco-example, an international leader in how people can come together to make decisions in harmony with the environment. What do you think?